Hey viewers, my name's Kara. I'm your host for Tuesdays here on the Pagan Perspective. This week's topic comes from Nick's Bird. The full text will be in the description of this video as always, but it's a longer one. I'm going to read it to you right now and then we'll get into it bit by bit. But essentially, this week's topic is about comparison, comparing our paths and our practices to other people's, and when that is helpful versus when that becomes a hindrance to our paths. So that's, in my words, the main idea that we're going for here. The full text is this, quote, "I'd be really interested in seeing everyone's opinions on healthy comparisons versus detrimental comparisons of one's spiritual path. Where's the line between learning new perspectives/methods and not allowing yourself to individually experience what is right for you? I'm curious how everyone deals with the urge to compare your own work to others, and if there are certain areas you feel it's okay to do so, if at all, or any areas that you feel it is most detrimental to do so." Spiritual paths can obviously be very different, but I'm speaking more about comparing things which have become more defined and structured, thus more easily allowing for comparisons, such as work rooted in a tradition/practice, parentheses, Celtic, Nordic, Wicca, Druidry, etc., methods of the craft, parentheses, casting a circle, calling the elements, etc., specific work done with particular deities, etc. Sometimes I think comparison can spur growth. Before, it's helped me rethink certain things I do and even changed my perception and methods for the better. Recently, I encountered it in a detrimental way, however, where I let myself cultivate so much self-doubt that it set back my spiritual growth and work until I had overcome it. So I was curious if anyone else had these problems or thought it was a worthwhile topic. Thanks for your time. End quote. So I paused a little bit in the middle there, but I didn't want to say anything because I was in the middle of a quote. My cat is being silly. I have the camera tripod, the phone, on a tripod on top of a box right now so that it's at the right level, and she was trying to crawl inside the box. And I was afraid she was going to do that and knock everything over or make noise. So I was a little distracted there. I apologize. She's being very cute. Anyway, so this topic is definitely a big one, not just literally 3 paragraphs of the topic itself, but it's kind of a big thing to think about. It's also something that I could answer very simply, so I'm going to try to find a happy medium between there, because I want to touch on some of these different aspects that were brought up in this full topic from Nick's, but also for me, it boils down to rather simple answers, really. And that's probably only because I've been doing this for such a long time and thinking about these types of things for such a long time and working out where that line is for myself. So, starting from the beginning, we're talking about healthy comparisons versus detrimental comparisons of one's spiritual path. Or as I said, in my own words, we're talking about comparisons and when they help us and when they hinder us. What is the line between learning new perspectives and methods and not allowing yourself to individually experience what's right for you? That first part, to me, that sounds like learning from people and choosing what you want to try out and see if it works for you versus other people telling you that you have to do it a certain way. That's what I think of when I think of not allowing yourself to individually experience what's right for you. Because learning new methods and perspectives, practices, things like that, to me, that is allowing ourselves to individually experience what is right for us. Because if we're choosing to try out these different methods that we learn from different people, that is us giving ourselves an opportunity to experience that and see what does that actually feel like in my body, in my energetic field. How am I able to work within that, whatever it is? Does it feel like it's helping me improve and maybe I want to adopt this for myself, or do I feel like, no, this doesn't work as well? So to me, learning new methods and experiences and things like that is how we allow ourselves to experience what is right for us. So when you're saying like kind of pitting them against each other in the way that it does, the way that Nick's asked this question, that's what I think of as like the way that would not be allowing ourselves to determine it for ourselves is if we allow other people to tell us, oh, you should be doing it this way because I said so, basically. The urge to compare your own work to other people, when is it okay to do so, when is it not? So yeah, maybe I should have actually started with the end point of this topic, which is just to say, yes, I've definitely had those moments as well where it's become detrimental. And I think that the big line for me between when is it helpful and when is it a hindrance, or when is it harmful, you could even say, is when I am not just thinking, how could this help me? You know, does this make sense to me? Do I enjoy this method more than what I'm doing right now? Does it seem to work better for me? Do I feel more connected? You know, whatever. When it's not that, when it becomes a hindrance is when it becomes this other way of doing it that is not what I do is better and is inherently better than what I do, or really when it becomes the most harmful is when I say that other person therefore is better than me. And essentially, I think that these types of comparisons between our paths and other people's are very helpful when it does spur growth, as Nick said, when it encourages us to explore and find fun and helpful and effective new ways of doing things, because maybe someone else says something and we're just like, oh, I never thought of it like that before. Let me try that out and see if that works for me. And you know, and it opens everything up and you're like, oh my gosh, yes, this works so much better. This is so cool. But there are definitely times where we might look at someone else's practice and say, oh my gosh, you know, they're so good at this. They're so connected to this. They're so dedicated to this, that, and the other thing. And if we find ourselves using that against ourselves to compare in a way that is, oh, that person is able to do it because they are better. That person is able to do it because they are more dedicated than I am, because they are more serious than I am. Or if we start saying things like, well, they're able to do that because I'm lazy and they're not. Or like, I just can't do that, or I'm no good at that, and that's why they are so successful and I'm not. As opposed to the helpful version, which is, wow, this person's doing this thing that I would love to be able to do, and they're really dedicating a lot of time to it. And you know, if I take a second and I look at myself and my actions and what I'm doing in my day-to-day life, I realize, you know, yeah, I'm not really as dedicated to that right now. But if I did spend the time and dedicate more time to it the way that this person does, I could have that too. You know, I could have that same connection if I put in the effort, if I put in the time, if I try. You know, when we look at someone else's path and we think, wow, you know, something about it is so cool and I want that, it's helpful when that desire encourages us to do what we need to do in our path to reach that. And it might involve being honest with ourselves about the fact that we're not there right now, but not in a way that is putting ourselves down, but just like a noticing, like, oh yeah, you know, I haven't put that much time into my meditative practice, or I haven't put that much time into learning about whatever it is that I want to be learning about. And so this other person who's so amazing at it, and you're like, I want to be good at that too. Oh, I guess, you know, maybe I should like try like put more work into it. You know, it doesn't come overnight. As opposed to seeing that and thinking, oh, I can just never have that because I'm not the kind of person who can do that. Or like there's something fundamental about me that prevents me from being whatever they are, or how we perceive them, or something that prevents me from having what I perceive them to have. Because again, we don't really know, right? So we might see someone talking about their path, hear them talking about their path, and we might think, oh, this is so cool, and it looks so easy for them. It just comes so simply. But if we take a second and think about it, or like look into it more, or even maybe ask them about it, you never know what the situation is. Maybe you find out it's because they've been working on it for the past 5 years. And 5 years ago, they were where you are now, but then they came up with a plan of action for themselves. They decided, okay, this is what I'm going to do to reach this goal, or to deepen this connection, develop this part of my practice, whatever it is. And now you're seeing them after 5 years of consistent work at doing that thing. So for us to sit here, wherever we are, and look at someone else who is where we want to be, I think the line, very simply, is, are we letting that comparison help us as something that we want to strive for, something that we can do if we work at it? Or are we letting it hinder us by saying, there is just some fundamental reason why I cannot be, cannot have, cannot do whatever this other person is, has, does. So that's really what it comes down to for me. And I've definitely had those negative comparison moments. For example, I'm not having a great day today. Today's been a weird day. I've been not in the best mood. And so there have been days like today, or much worse, mental state sort of days for me, where definitely if I come across something that someone else is, has, does, on a day where I'm just like really not in a good mental space, I'm not able to find that positive aspect of things. Yeah, there have been times where I've been like, oh, that person is just so good, and I'm never going to be able to do that because, well, they're motivated and I'm just not, and I want to be motivated, but as much as I want to be, I can't make myself be, and I'm just trying, but I'm so frustrated because I can't do it. And then there are other days where knowing that about myself and knowing that that is something that I have thought in the past enables me to stop and think, okay, how am I doing this to myself? How can I stop doing that and treat this in a way that will actually help me? So that's where it becomes, okay, yeah, this person is doing something that I want to be doing. Well, what can I do to reach that point myself? Because they had to do something in order to get there. Some people, might be naturally more talented at certain things, or have certain things come more easily to them. That is true. We all have our different propensities for different things. So some things come much more easily to us than other people. There are definitely things that are like that for me too. So it might just be thinking about what areas you excel in, we excel in, thinking about like, okay, well, this person, this thing that I want to be able to do comes really easy to them, and it's just so difficult for me, and I've tried and I've tried and I've tried and I just can't do it, and they're just so lucky and talented, and I'm just not that. Harmful comparisons, right? Detrimental comparisons. So we might stop and say, on the other hand, I'm really naturally talented at this thing, and maybe I just don't value it as highly because it comes so easily for me. So I forget that maybe there's someone else sitting out there in the world looking at me and thinking, oh, that thing comes so easily to them and I wish I could do it, but I just can't do it. And meanwhile, here it's like, it's so easy for us, So we take things for granted. We devalue things that come easily to us, and that's not a mindset that I like. I don't like only valuing things that we have to work really hard for, because I think that really important and worthwhile things can come easily, and that if we allow them to, perhaps they will. And I think a lot of the time things are harder for us because society teaches us that they have to be. We're all taught that, the only things worth having are worth fighting for and working really hard for, and that you have to bust your butt every single day in order to make anything happen. And so we think if we don't have to do that, that it's not that worthwhile. But I personally think that it's incredibly important to value things that are simple and that are just, just allow it and let it be type of things. And so that's a whole other aspect to this for me. But yeah, I do just want to touch on the couple of things that Nick specifically mentioned, like talking about comparing things that are more defined and more structured, like work rooted in specific traditions or practices, specific methods such as casting circle, calling the elements, or specific work done with particular deities. So the first thing about comparing different traditions to one another, I think comparing whole traditions like that is helpful only in as much as I ever say that like labels are helpful. They're only helpful in as much as they allow people to understand where you're coming from. Unfortunately, I've mostly seen people compare their tradition or their like whole religious practice to someone else's in pretty harmful ways, or just like kind of inaccurate ways. So unfortunately, a lot of the time we see people wanting to explain what their path is by explaining that it's not something else. And unfortunately, defining ourselves by what we are not is not helpful in that, one, it doesn't say what we are. It only says what we're not. Cool. Which is only part of the equation, right? But two, it also often involves people picking out the very negative qualities of the other thing that they're trying to say they're not, and like disassociating themselves from it. Because typically if it's something that's not part of your practice, it's because you don't agree with it. So like I could say, my practice is not other person's practice because other person's practice does this thing that I think is wrong. And I don't do that, and they do it like this, which we think is stupid or whatever. Like I've literally, unfortunately, seen people type out blogs, websites, pamphlets that get handed out at events that are essentially comparing their path to other people's in that way, that they're trying to make theirs very clearly defined against what they're not, but they're often doing it by saying, this other path does something like this that we do not agree with, and we don't like that at all. And what's really annoying, especially, is when the things that they're saying are not even accurate about the other path that they're trying to compare. So this is where the whole practice of trying to define ourselves by what we're not and comparing directly to another tradition in that way tends to 90% of the time be harmful, because that's usually what people are coming from, is a lack of understanding about what's really going on in those other paths. So that's always been really annoying when I see that happening. Different methods of the craft, comparing, casting a circle, calling the elements, etc. I never personally come across detrimental versions of comparing those types of things, unless, like I said way back at the beginning, unless it's other people trying to tell you that you're somehow less than they are because you don't do it the way that they do. Like people who think that there's only one way to do a specific thing and are really frankly mean to people who don't do it that way. That would be my example of the detrimental comparison in that case. Because for me personally, different methods of casting circle, different methods of calling the elements, that's just something that I accept in my practice. That I actually love that there are countless ways to cast circle, and there are countless ways to call the elements, and that if you really wanted to, every single ritual that you ever participate in your entire life could do them different ways and have different combinations of them. And depending on who is doing it, who is grounding you, who is casting your circle, who is calling your elements, and are you having 4 different people call the 4 elements, and then those 4 people might choose to do them different ways. Someone might use a very traditional invocation, someone else might do it by reciting a poem, that's not specifically pagan liturgy, like it's not written to be an invocation, but like a poem that reminds them of that element, and they might decide to do that. Someone else might decide to invoke the next element by singing a song. Someone else might do an interpretive dance, whatever. Like, that's just part of what I love. So to me, typically, there are no unhelpful comparisons between those types of things, because those are always things that I love and appreciate, that there are different ways of doing them. Casting circle, yeah. Going back a little bit into comparing different traditions, there have been times that I have attended other traditions' rituals, and seen the way that different groups, different paths within paganism cast circle, the way that they call the elements and how it's different. And there are definitely comparisons in that for me, because I have been part of some where, like, in the moment, in the ritual, you're participating, you're a willing participant, they're leading it, you're just there to observe and participate, lend your energy to whatever's going on, right? So you go along with it, right? Like, so I've talked about this before, like when you want to go to an open circle, you go with an open mind, because not everyone is going to do things the exact same way that you would. And that's just something that you have to be aware of when you're going into those situations. But there have been times where there are definitely comparisons going on in my mind where I'm like, oh, okay, so they said it this way. And that's, that gives me a very certain feeling and a connotation that I don't agree with for my practice. And so when I go home, I am not tempted to try casting the circle the exact same way that group did, because there is something about it that to me doesn't feel right for the way that I practice. But to me, it's okay that they do it that way, because I just recognize that that's a different practice. That's a different tradition. We don't all do things the same way. That said, like, if I were to choose to work within that tradition, that's the way that tradition does it. So that's the way we would do it. So if you're a member of a group, even if it's a casual group, it either has to be the type of tradition or group that welcomes completely different methods of doing things all the time, so that every single ritual could be different and have different elements all throughout, depending on who's doing it. Or you have to decide if there's going to be a very specific system that you all use when you're working together in that tradition, in that group. Certain groups do have certain ways of doing things. So yeah, and then specific work done with particular deities, I never compare that between myself and anyone else, because I firmly believe that deity is largely unknowable. Like, what am I even trying to say right now? But essentially that the way we interact interact with deity is very different and very personal. And so I never feel the urge to negatively compare myself or my relationship or my interactions with specific deities compared to how other people talk about them, because part of my belief about that is that it's personal and different for everyone. So I think if I had the kind of view that I believed that it would be the same for everyone no matter what, then I might find myself, like, if someone else said they had a very specific experience with Athena, for example, and my experiences with Athena do not match that, then if I felt like that person was more authentic than me or had a better connection than me or something like that, then I might be tempted to negatively compare myself and say, well, that didn't happen for me, and the experience wasn't like that for me, so I must be doing it wrong. I must be horrible, whatever. Harmful comparison. But because I believe that it's very personal and individual, someone else can tell me a story about an experience that they had with Athena, and it can be completely different than any experience that I've ever had with that deity. And that's fine. Like, it doesn't bother me, because just like with the different methods of casting circle, different methods of calling the elements, interacting with deity in different ways, and the fact that it happens differently for different people at different times, in different circumstances, whatever, that's all just part of my view of how things work and how I approach my practice. So that's all good for me. I should have thought of it earlier. If I had thought of it earlier, I could have written it down. Well, I have it written down somewhere, but I could have had it. And I don't remember who it's by right now. But there's a quote that I love that's about this kind of comparison, that it's about, like, essentially when someone is better than me at something that I consider really important to my sense of being and my sense of self. And when someone else is better at it, then I feel worse. I feel like I have to work harder to be like them. And, I want to be, if I'm well known for something, and if it's something that I highly identify with, then I really want to be the best, or I want to be really good at it, at least. I want to be respected. I want to be seen as someone who knows what they're talking about in that realm. Whereas if I am really bad at something that has nothing to do with my sense of self and that I do not use to define me, then I don't care if I'm, completely horrible at it. I love this quote because to me, it's just something that I really strongly resonate with. So for example, for me, I don't care that I am really bad at doing math in my head because I've never really been good at all types of math, and I haven't taken I took like crazy types of math in high school just because I could. But I wouldn't have been able to get through like calculus without my friends to help me. So when I was bad at it, I didn't mind asking for help or like looking like an idiot about it, because like a mathematician is not how I see myself, So like if I'm at the store and I'm taking forever like trying to count out my change, and I'm like, wait, and I have to like count on my fingers, I don't care, because I do not see myself as some great mathematician. But when it's something that really strongly defines me, like knowing basic things about a lot of different neo-pagan paths and like about our history and about our community, like something that I really highly identify with this community and it's really important to me. If it turns out that there's something really basic that I've overlooked that I didn't know and that I'm wrong about, like I feel awful about that. So it's similar because we're talking about comparison. When does it help? When does it hurt? So it really depends on how strongly you identify with something. If you consider yourself the foremost expert on a specific deity, for example, for whatever reason, I don't know why you would consider yourself that, but if you do, if you consider yourself like to have the best connection with a specific deity, and then you see someone else who you think has a better connection than you, you bet you might feel really negatively impacted by that and really want to compare yourself, as opposed to someone having a really strong connection with a deity that you don't have any relationship at all. You're just like, cool, good for you, So it depends on how we feel about ourselves. Ultimately, it depends on what we identify with. And for me, it depends on if we are using it in a way to allow ourselves to learn something new that might be better for us, or if we're using it as an excuse to say why we are less than and why we can never be, do, or have what someone else does. So I agree, comparison can spur growth at times. It can definitely help you rethink things. It can help you, open new ways of doing things. There have been many, many times throughout the past 10 years that someone else has brought something up, or I've read something in a book, or I've seen something at a public ritual or whatever, and I'm like, what? That makes so much sense. And it just like opens up a door in your mind and you're like, this is awesome. And then there are other times where I've seen things and I've been like, oh, I don't really like that. That doesn't really make sense with how I view the world or how I think this works. Like, I wouldn't, like, you can do that because that's your tradition, but for me, like, I'm not going to go home and say things exactly the same way that you just did, or I'm not going to go and cast my circle exactly the same way that you just did, because something about that doesn't feel right for me. And that does ultimately come down to allowing ourselves to individually experience what's right for us. Bringing it back around to the beginning. So yeah, definitely a worthwhile question, Nyx. Absolutely. Definitely that is a problem that I have had before, negatively comparing myself, allowing that to be a detriment. And that's just honestly something that we all deal with, not just in neo-pagan paths, but not just in our religion or in our spirituality in general, but like in our lives, in our everyday mental states. Comparisons are things that we come up against all the time. And yeah, sometimes we are going to be in the headspace where we allow it to be negative, and other times it's going to be like, oh yeah, whatever, cool. Like, you either let it inspire you or it rolls off your back because you're like, it really doesn't have anything to do with me, so it's fine, it's whatever. So my partner and I like to say to each other a lot of the time, actually, since I just used that metaphor of letting it roll off your back, my partner and I like to say to each other, be a duck. Just let it roll off your back. So be a duck in those situations if that helps you. But again, if it doesn't help you, then don't do that. You don't have to do it just because I said so. You don't have to do anything just because anyone said so, unless you choose to be in a working group or in a specific tradition that does have a very specific way of doing it, and in which case we are agreeing to do it a certain way. So if you're going to join the duck club, you got to be a duck. That's all I'm saying. Otherwise, whatever. Do what you want. Thanks so much for watching. I think I'm in a better mood now. Yeah. We can turn this day around. Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. I will see you next week. And until then, don't forget to be awesome, blessed be, and goodbye.